All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Climate Startup Week. This is the summer edition. We'll just give everyone a minute or two to settle in, and then we'll begin. Okay, some more folks joining in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will begin the session shortly, just giving everyone another minute or so to come in. Okay, great. I think we're good to start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the summer edition of Climate Startup Week. Today's session is on green hydrogen. Very happy that Blume is hosting this. We have Mudit Naren here from Blume. He's the vice president there who is hosting this session. And we have an incredible panel as well with us here today. The session is called Green Hydrogen, Hype, Hope, or Opportunity. Much anticipated session. Excited to see how this plays out. So, Mudit, the floor is yours. I give it to you now.
Thank you, Ashwati, and thank you to the Climate Collective Fund for inviting us to partner on this session. Delighted to see the turnout. Welcome, everybody. We have a very interesting panel today. How the session will go is that my colleague Sonisha will present what we are calling the Green Hydrogen Blueprint. Blueprint is a series of reports from Blume on a very specific topic, on a series of topics on how we think the startup ecosystem will engage with the clean energy transition, primarily in India, but also going global a little bit. We believe that these blueprints will help not just startup founders to fine-tune their pitches, but also for more investors to understand the sector and see how they can join in this effort. We also have two other speakers today. So let me start with introducing the founder first, as all investors should be. So delighted to have Prashanta with us from Nutrace. Nutrace is an electrolyzer company, and I'll allow him to introduce the company in a bit. He himself is a Marie Curie Fellow with a PhD in fluid mechanics and energy engineering from the University of Grenoble, France. He's an aerospace engineer turned entrepreneur with industrial and research experience in fluid dynamics, computational mechanics, and new product development. He has worked with notable organizations such as Leonardo Helicopters across numerous locations in Europe, and a perfect example of how people from various disciplines and fields of study are now coming into the sector of energy and climate change. And that is where all the best talent in the world is now getting attracted. So welcome, Prashanto. I'll get you to share what your company is doing and what you are doing right after Sonisha's little PPT. We also have Alex Rutter, who's a research manager and electricity sector lead for Third Derivative, the world's largest climate tech accelerator. He has previously worked for an integrated power utility, BCG, where he led the work on green hydrogen, and multilaterals, including IFC, where he led Asia Pacific work on green hydrogen and energy storage. Welcome, Alex. I think your perspective across consulting, development finance, and now venture finance will be very interesting. And your experience also seems to have seen a couple of cycles of green hydrogen, hype, hope, and opportunity. So
Yes.
let me invite Tanisha to talk about the Blume Hydrogen Blueprint and where we call out whether it is It is definitely more than hype. It is a hope in many ways. But we, as investors, as people who support founders, believe that we should look for everywhere where we can see an opportunity. So, Nisha, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mudit. So, hi everyone. Very, very pleased to be presenting here in front of the panel. And I'll just quickly share my screen probably. And let's begin.
And while you do that, I should read out your introduction as well. So
Sure.
Nisha is in the deep tech team at Blume and does some excellent work across energy transition, biotech, and other sectors, especially in the medical sector. And she's been doing a lot of work identifying opportunities which are coming from universities and academia. And her work in deep tech started during her time at Amex, when she also worked as a data scientist for their worldwide portfolio. And I find myself learning from her new things every week in different sectors almost every time. So thanks, Anisha.
Thank you so much, Mudit. Thank you so much for the lovely words. And sure, I'll just probably dive deeper into the kind of blueprint that we have made for hydrogen. And why exactly hydrogen and why now for hydrogen? So I'll start off with a beautiful quote that says, hydrogen given enough time turns into people. So this statement beautifully captures the sense of hydrogen's journey from being the simplest element of this universe to being a fundamental part of our lives as we know it. And this time, as we stand on this era, as we stand on the brink of this new era, hydrogen is poised to change the world yet again, but in the form of green lenses, that is green hydrogen. So let's talk about, probably let's try to quantify our world in a certain way. So if you were probably trying to explain Minecraft to an alien, so imagine you have a really big shopping list for the planet in your hand. So you have 8 billion tons of coal that produces around 22.8 billion tons of CO2. It's like if every person on earth owned about 3 cars and all of us decided to take a trip to the moon. It's that much CO2 emissions we are talking about. Imagine 5 billion tons of oil producing around 15.7 billion tons of CO2. It's like Earth being a chain smoker. Imagine 1.9 billion tons of steel producing around 4 billion tons of CO2. It's as if, imagine a skyscraper completely being built out of steel, just 1.9 billion times over. You have 450 million tons of LNG producing around 1.5 billion tons of CO2. You have 250 million tons of ammonia producing around 1 billion tons of CO2. And you'll probably needing 30 to 40 million tons of green hydrogen in the coming decade to clean up all this mess that we have caused because of this wild energy party that the earth has been having for a while. So to begin with my first question, why suddenly hydrogen? Why are we talking so much about hydrogen? Um, there's no moonwalk breakthroughs that have happened in the past few years. Nothing has disruptively changed in our world, except that the prices of renewable energy has gone down drastically. The cost of renewable energy has gone down. The notion of replacing your gas routes with electricity has come out. Overall system efficiency has increased. Electrolyzer costs probably they have dropped by 60% in the past 3 years, and hence the entire notion of switching to a more cleaner and greener alternative in our energy sources. And that is why all the craze, all the hype around green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is probably expected to reduce all of our CO2 emissions by 90% in the coming few decades. So this is the fuel we back. This is the element that we back as venture capitalists, probably for the coming 2 or 3 decades. So while the energy mix has been rapidly transitioning to a more renewables base, wide-scale integration of these renewable energy sources and obviously matching the intermittent demand and supply gap of these renewable energy sources is what calls for the need of green hydrogen. And these are just the CO2 equations of each of the end use sectors of each of the say industries deciphered here. And while green hydrogen can tackle probably all of these elements in an independent manner, it might not be sensible enough to do so in the very first phase. So the hard to abate sectors, for example, iron, steel, storage, long haul aviation, power, etc. The hard to abate sectors where you have very concentrated sort of a usage, where the availability of there's availability of less efficient alternatives or probably none in a lot of these. where the requirement of capex per CO2 ton saved, or probably per kg of hydrogen produced, isn't that much, are the solutions that will be firstly adopting green hydrogen as a fuel. So here this slide talks about the whys and hows of green hydrogen. Why green hydrogen in its way of adaptability and sustainability, and the hows of green hydrogen, how hydrogen will be used or produced. So it can be produced from a plethora of ways, from a lot of feedstocks, and it can be consumed in a lot of direct and indirect manner. That obviously you can read from the blueprint. So this is one of the standard slides each. Why are we just indexing on one of the shades of hydrogen, that is just green? And each hue of hydrogen here represents a different method of production. So the gray represents hydrogen produced via SMR using natural gas. Economically priced, but commands very hefty CO2 emissions. Then you have black brown hydrogen produced via coal, marginally pricier than gray hydrogen, but unfortunately boasts of even heftier CO2 emissions. We have blue hydrogen, again produced via natural gas, but with a carbon capture technology. So again pricier, but slightly better for environment. And then you have green hydrogen, a vision in renewables, produced from renewable energy, completely as pure as intended. And then you have the upcoming pink or purple hydrogen, they say. That's hydrogen produced via nuclear power with an electrolytic twist. It's very promising, but still say undefined in a way, in terms of cost, in terms of production, etc. So green hydrogen, it's the hydrogen produced using any sort of renewable energy, say wind, water, solar, hydroelectric power. It's just production processes being as pure and as green as intended. So this slide represents the entire value chain of green hydrogen. So it starts with the production of course, your renewable energy, which in turn serves as a feedstock for producing any sort of hydrogen, be it black, gray, green. But since we are talking about renewables, so obviously green hydrogen. So there are a lot of methods with which you can produce green hydrogen. You have thermochemical methods, you have biological ways of producing, you have biomass, you have thermochemical splitting, you have electrolyzers, of course, we have Prashanta here. So the second part talks about the production methods that take renewable energy as a feedstock. And then you have the storage and transportation layer that solves for the intermittent gap, as I was talking about, for the production and supply of hydrogen. And then you have the plethora of use cases that hydrogen can tackle in a direct format, say being directly used in industrial processes, or probably an indirect format, say green ammonia, fertilizers, etc. So this is the adoption metrics or the demand metrics that we talk about for hydrogen. So fertilizers, around 3 million tons of hydrogen, if I'm not wrong, is required just for the fertilizers industry. And over, of course, 3 million tons probably would be around 50% of the total demand that India would be having for green hydrogen. So it's that big a sector and that's big an adoption area for green hydrogen initially. Hydrogen and refineries, again, another bigger sector, 2.5 million tons of hydrogen probably would be needed for the refineries. And specifically for processes like desulfurization, where you reduce the sulfur content of crude oil, you reduce the sulfur content of fuels, and hydrocracking, hydrotreating, increasing the efficiency of refined products. So that is another area where hydrogen would be used. Steel probably would represent one of the biggest demand sectors for green hydrogen in the coming decade, with around 8 million tons of demand just from this one single sector. So this matrix flows from very high adoption sectors to low adoption sectors. And as I told, areas where there are lesser efficient alternatives available, concentrated usage, hard to abate sectors is where we'll see most of the demand for green hydrogen. This slide summarizes all the production methods that we have for green hydrogen, and almost always there's been a trade-off between the degree of carbon emissions that a certain technology or a certain production process has, and the degree of commercialization of the process. So now the real hunt is to probably find a technology or a process that can fall in the bottom right quadrant of this production matrix. So the question is, if there will be a new technology that probably will fill up the space, or probably one of the existing technologies would move to this quadrant. So that is something we'd again would love to know from Prashanta, from Alex in this panel discussion. This is just the estimated price range, the 111 scheme that we have set for ourselves, under $1 per ton of hydrogen produced in a coming decade. And this also maps all the other processes and their corresponding prices of producing hydrogen. So we as Blume, obviously we studied the entire value chain, but we have identified a few sub-segments where we think probably startups or even say the big boys like Adani, Ambani, etc. are most poised, most set to disrupt. So one of them being storage, obviously. So hydrogen's lower energy density makes storage a very tricky problem for hydrogen. So this is one of the white spaces that we identified. So it can either be stored, say, in a gaseous format, in a liquid format, or probably in a chemical form. So when we talk about gas, we talk about high pressure compressions. We talk about salt caverns, which often involves high capital commitments, geographical disadvantages. For example, you can't find soil caverns here and there. So it involves certain geographical disadvantages. Storing hydrogen in a liquid format again calls for some cooling costs, some compression costs. So efficiency losses that happen. And then you have the ammonia tanks, storing hydrogen in a chemical format. So there you need to establish supply chains, you need to identify your applications. So though most of the hydrogen is what we predict would be produced and consumed at the same location, still solving for hydrogen storage is an interesting problem that we would like to see how startups or probably all the entities handle that. So we were just going about another report yesterday, and it says it's a $125 billion opportunity in the coming decade. While it's currently at an 8 billion mark in India, at least, we personally predict that it's going to fall somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 billion dollar opportunity by 2050. And again, while the big boys, Adani, Ambani, all of them, steel, etc., they have committed in the range of 80 to 100 billion dollars in the coming 2 decades. Still, we think most of the innovation that's there bound to come will come from startups in general, in India at least. So again, one of the other biggest white spaces that we have found for ourselves are electrolyzer tech stacks. Electrolyzer tech stacks, biohydrogen ways of production, your storage problems, then you have fuel cells. All 3 or 4 of these are the biggest white spaces that at least we have identified, where we as VCs can take a piece of the pie. So electrolyzers, again, they need to have lower costs. They need to have higher efficiencies. They need to have longer lifelines. And again, Prashanta would be in a better position to probably comment on this. And what we have seen, or probably we have read from the market reports, etc., is that as much as an 80% reduction in the costs of electrolyzers are required. Imported raw materials need to be substituted with more actively produced raw materials in India. More active catalysts are required, product innovations are required, like thinner membranes, etc., for the electrolyzer tech stack, for the electrolyzer industry to take off in India. And we think that manufacturing at scale and solving for supply chain issues probably would be the first ones to target to have this subsegment take off. The next one is obviously biohydrogen production. And we think personally that it's set to win in India because of the abundance of industrial waste that we have. And comparatively lower infra requirements, lower capex requirements that you need for it. But again, our understanding around the entire microbial ecosystem, or probably the genetic manipulations of enzymes, we are still very nascent. We are still very young at it. So we still don't have a lot of experience, knowledge about it. So that's again an interesting area that we as Blume would be tracking, for India at least. And last but not the least, obviously, fuel cells. So the manufacturing costs in fuel cells, one of the things that we have noticed, still dominate the overall cost of fuel cells. There's a lot of dependence on imported hydrogen fuel cell material. There aren't a lot of patents in the value chain. There's a lot of refueling infra that's required in India for hydrogen fuel cells to take off. And again, all of these sub problems make it a very interesting problem to solve, at least for India. And here are our heroes. Here are some of the startups that we have interacted with in the past 6-7 months. And while our initial guess was that most of the startups would be concentrated, say, somewhere in the electrolyzer tech stack area, but we are very keen to see there are a lot of startups coming up, covering the entire range, covering the entire say the value chain. You have startups in the production space, you have startups in the biomass production, electrolyzers, you have storage, you have fuel cells. So it's like covering the entire scale that you have for value chain. So this was probably a very brief introduction, brief glimpse of our entire blueprint. So you can scan this link, scan this QR, or probably click on this link, and you can get access to the bigger version of this blueprint. And most happy to take any questions, to take any feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonisha. I am sure some of you will be interested to go to the link and see more. You can also go to Blume's website. It's linked there. I think Sonisha ended at a very interesting point on identifying the opportunities for companies in this space. Too many people think of hydrogen as overhyped. Some people think it really is the hope. We just look at the opportunity across materials, across processes, the product engineering, solutioning, and maybe a few other spaces that we haven't thought of. And I think the centerpiece of this will have to be electrolyzers in many ways, bioreactors, electrolyzers. And delighted to have Prashanto here with me, representing a company called Nutrace. There were some wonderful entrepreneurs in this space, and the one reason I invited Prashanto was because he and I did disagree on some aspects of this report. And so I thought it would be important to have that note in this conversation. So we did at Blume take a few editorial calls, which convinced us on how this entire ecosystem will evolve. But I believe Prashanto has a few discordant notes. So I invite him to talk about the company, talk about his journey, and then maybe things that you disagree with or how you think the market is evolving.
Sure. Thank you, Mudit. Very interesting report. First of all, congratulations, guys, for the hard work. Right. So I think I'll start by introducing the company. So Nutrace is a technology company based out of Bangalore. And what we do is we design, build this next-gen electrolyzers that primarily solve for a few critical problems. One, what Sonisha was mentioning, right? The supply chain of critical components. So we build a technology that doesn't use any of the critical components or rare earth material, and yet gives you the best of efficiencies. We also solve for a very critical challenge that electrolyzers are facing and would face going forward as well, and that is the integration with renewable electricity. The development of electrolyzer has been going on for many, many decades now, but a lot of different technologies faces this challenge of integrating with renewable electricity and working across different load factors that comes with the intermittent source of renewable electricity like solar or wind. The final piece would be manufacturing, and that would actually come from manufacturing at scale. A lot of different components for critical pieces are not designed for manufacturing at scale, which has to be addressed in terms of how we look into it. And as a company, this is what we do. So our work spans across finding novel electrocatalyst that doesn't use any rare earth metal, to designing novel stacks that doesn't use any critical component, to building entire balance of plant and software for affordable green hydrogen production. I will take up the discussions on the other point probably in the next set of questions. I will let others introduce themselves in the panel.
Great, thank you. Alex, you've spent a few years looking at this sector from various angles. Welcome sharing your journey and also any reactions to the presentation or the report that you've seen, and maybe we take the conversation from there.
Yeah, no, I think the report was fantastic. I read it when it came out. We read it again yesterday, and to be honest, we don't have too much to add, just because I think it's been covered so well. So my compliments to Sonisha for that. I will say two minor comments on the rainbow. I think two other areas that we're excited about. One is turquoise. So this is methane pyrolysis of natural gas, which is more relevant in jurisdictions where you have cheap natural gas. But the other one is white hydrogen, which we haven't, which is starting to get a lot of attention. This is naturally forming geological hydrogen, which we'd love to see people start investigating and researching here in India as well. I really like to point at the top, about how there hasn't been any fundamental breakthroughs. I mean, I think companies like Nutrace are somewhat fundamental, and getting new materials getting these process innovations, bringing the cost down to a point where the electrolyzer is competitive, I think can really make a difference. And you do reach that inflection point where things make it different. I did also want to highlight some of these fundamental breakthroughs, like OSIS, for example, was on some initial slides with the bio. My point is there is potentially some game-changing opportunities as well that totally kind of shift the paradigm. Because when I first looked at this 5 years ago, the economics were not there at all, and now we're getting to the point now where it's starting to get more and more attractive, and we're getting more and more excited.
Great, thank you. And that point of cost is actually very interesting. Prashanta, do you want to come in on this? One piece of data that we've used in this blueprint is that the cost of electrolyzers has reduced by almost 60% in the last 3 years. Those figures may be aligned with what you have or not. But do you want to share what you are seeing, maybe even the kind of innovation that you're bringing to market and how you think the revolution will happen?
Sure. I think, just from the point of view of electrolyzers, I think one of the things that I did highlight, and I think it came up in the presentation as well, that the degree of commercialization of different technologies that have been clubbed together, the different kinds of electrolysis paths that have been clubbed together, I think is something that we need to look into. I think alkaline systems have been used in power plants and nuclear facilities for decades now, and the availability of the technology has been there. Specifically on the cost of electrolyzers, I think there are varying costs based on this, even similar technologies, but there are varying costs based on the reliability of the system which are being produced. So there are the cost spectrum is actually turning out to be very, very interesting. There are electrolyzers which are being proposed in the market from countries like China, which are going down the cost curve drastically. But then there are serious reliability challenges and questions on the performance of the system. Whereas what we have seen very recently, even a Bloomberg NEF report has pointed out that the cost of electrolyzers are going up from European suppliers. And we are finding the same curve. The customers are willing to pay a premium if the product has a few things in terms of reliability, efficiency, and performance. So I actually believe that the final decision will not be just driven by the total capex cost. It will be a combination of capex cost, reliability, and a lot of other secondary factors that will affect the entire life cycle of the project.
Right. Sunisha, do you want to comment on this one? Or Alex?
Sure. I guess.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
I'll just go ahead, Sunisha.
No, go ahead, Alex, please.
No, I wanted to add, I mean, to me, we often talk about the levelized cost of hydrogen. So, to the extent that you're getting a higher efficiency, that can compensate for, higher capex. To the extent that you have a higher purity, and so you have less purification, that can compensate for higher capex. So, every product is going to be unique. I haven't seen Nutrace's models enough to say, for sure that makes sense. But yes, I think generally the broader point that you need to consider all these factors before making a final decision. It's not going to be purely based on who's the lowest cost. I think that's a really, really key takeaway then.
Did you want to
Actually, there's one follow-up question at Mudit. So that says why the electrolyzer are one of the most bullish technology the industry is relying upon. So that's a very interesting one to take. Probably I'll start Mudit, Prashanta, Alex, feel free to add. So I think again, not over-indexing on costs, but still probably costs play a big role in industry adoption whenever technologies change, whenever there's a status shift of technologies happen to change from the status quo. You need some technologies that are as reliable, as easily integrable to the existing solutions, and of course cost efficient. They give you the whys and the hows very naturally, and probably out of all the production processes that you have for hydrogen right now, I think electrolyzers is poised to win, at least in the coming decade, because of its ease of adoption, because of the Indian players cracking the tech stack, because it has existed for a while, it's going to exist for a while. We have seen those cost curves play out for us. And the alternatives, the system efficiency that's that's cracking in for electrolyzers at least, which is not there for, say, alternative methods, say photochemical, for example, or probably biomass. In fact, biomass. India is very rich in biomass, but again, the technology that can crack those cost curves, that can crack that adoption without the involvement of a lot of capex is still not there. So Prasanta would love to hear what probably other investors have told you, why exactly they are bullish on the electrolyzers as a tech for India.
Sure, I think I actually don't recollect a lot about what investors have said, but I do recollect what I believe in, and that's fundamentally this, that when you're looking at a solution, I always believe that the world will be eclectic. You have different solution for different problem statement, right? You cannot have one magic solution solving for all. When you're looking for an industrial decarbonization, there are two things that's working out for electrolyzers. One is the scale. Biomass and biogas have been around for a lot of time, but again, the scalability has been a challenge in terms of the industrial volumes that people are looking at, and that's where electrolyzer comes in. The second critical factor that we tend to forget is the human factor, and this is basically the familiarity with the process plant that our industries have. We know how to run process plants. We know how to run those big machines. So you cannot let go of the familiarity of a particular industry. When I say there will be industrial transition and decarbonization, you don't expect that the skill set will be obsolete and people will become jobless all of a sudden. So there has to be a translation of skill set within the industry. And there's a familiarity with running the electrolyzer with any other process plant that the industry has. And that's what I think that's what they are betting on.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I think, I mean, India has had both industrial experience in large-scale processes, but also a lot of academic strengths. These three areas, chemistry, chemical engineering, and material science, which are all relevant to green hydrogen and generally a lot to the energy transition as well, have deep academic strengths in the country. So I believe a lot of the innovation will come from that. I think we are seeing in the slide that Sonisha showed up with about 8 or 9 companies, at least 2 of those came from ISC and IIT Madras, and maybe, if I'm not wrong, 3, right? So those traditional strengths that we had in these 3 areas of chemistry, chemical engineering, and material science will start playing up in the area of green hydrogen. Also, just to go back to the point on cost, I think Alex had a very good point on how there'll be a lot of factors, whether it is utilization, whether it is amortization, the cost of capital. All that can only play out when you have a substantial enough scale of installations, a large enough fleet that there is industrial learning as well as documented academic learning. And going beyond startups now, I think the fact that so many entities like Indian Oil Corporation, ONGC, the Reliance Group, the Irani Group, they've announced large installations is actually very good news, because not only will you get a large amount of hydrogen production in the country, but you will get more engineers learning about it. You'll get more process and plant managers who know how to run these plants, and that over time learning does reduce the cost. I'm reminded of the buy down in solar costs from Germany between 2009 and 16. And if I am not wrong, there was some study which said that almost 30% of it was actually manpower learning. So the cost that came down, a lot of it is systemic learning in people who are doing this as part of their business or their work. So the large announcements that we are seeing, if they come to fruition, would actually help us decrease the costs even more. And that's why it's very important that the first few plans definitely go through. We are getting some very good questions, Prashant and Alex. I'll take one of those, which I think is a good one to get into the large scale implementation of it, which is the one on the entire story of deionizing water, because water in India is, of course, always a very contentious issue. I think half of you must be in Bangalore and probably feeling it in your lives right now, right? And you are now talking about generating energy or bringing into the energy mix a part of the solution which is very dependent on water. So can we talk a little bit about the source of water that we'll use, the purity that you'll require for electrolysis, the impact on water supply? Any thoughts and ideas on those? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to take it first. So Nisha, if you want to start with that, maybe Alex and Prashant can come in later.
Yeah, I'll let Prasanta remark on the specifics of theirs, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, but please run the numbers yourself. If you actually look at the liters, you need 10 liters of water per kg of hydrogen, and you actually say, okay, we need 5 mmTPA per hydrogen. It's something like 0.1% of India's water supply. So, in terms of sourcing, and especially, if you're in the desert or whatever, I'm not saying it's not a consideration, especially if you're using seawater, you got deionized, et cetera. But yeah, the absolute volume of waters that's not going to be a constraint. That's not the binding constraint. The amount of RE availability may be the binding constraint, not water. But I'll let Prasant talk about their technology specifically in terms of the requirements.
Sure, I think well, electrolysis by a process will require 9 to 10 kg of water per kg of hydrogen. That's the barrier of chemistry that we cannot break, right? But I think there are a few interesting points to always keep in mind. The world produced 100 million tons of hydrogen, a lot part of it from SMR and coal gasification. SMR still requires 9 to 12 liters of water per kg of hydrogen. The name is steam methane reforming, which means you're still using water, right? The other process, the coal gasification, which is a major process at least in China, uses around 20 liters of water per kg of hydrogen. Now, as the demand increases, what we are talking about replacing some part of it with green hydrogen, and the consumption of the water at least will be at par with SMR. That's one part. The second part is basically as we are looking at using more and more large plants for production of green hydrogen, desalination will have to be a requirement. What we have to do, and I think there are large-scale use cases on demonstration of desalination plants in cities like Chennai and other places, right? Even for Bangalore water crisis, people are proposing that we should have to really consider a desalination plant and pumping water to Bangalore. I personally believe that water availability will not be a challenge as long as we know and we improve the desalination technology that's already been improved. What you will also see is most of the industrial processes are based around coasts, and the major projects are also announced to be next to the coast because they already tap into the seawater. The cost primarily is not from desalination, but also pumping in the brine to the sea, and that's why they prefer to be next to the sea. And I think if we tap into that, it should not be a challenge. The major challenge that we focus on as a company is basically how do we reduce the stringent requirement of deionized, demineralized water in our electrolyzer stack. And as a virtue of our technology, we can actually use RO water, which is domestically used in our electrolyzers. The presence of small volume of salt doesn't affect our electrolyzer technology or performance or stack life. So I think that's the innovation that we can do. But we would definitely prefer that the water is devoid of any chlorine and any other compounds that are typically found in saline water. One of the other interesting factors that we are always asked is, why can't you do seawater electrolysis, which is also a very interesting question. The thing is our stacks can actually withstand seawater. We have electrocatalyst and stack material which can withstand seawater with coatings and everything else. But the problem comes that when you're building up a plant, you're also integrating a lot of different instrumentation, right? And the instrumentation also have to withstand the entire chlorine and other salts in the seawater. And that's where the major challenge is, that how do we have an industry that can actually build those instrumentation and different other equipment that goes into a balance of plant and can withstand seawater. I think that will be a continued research topic for a few years before we can actually crack it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that might end up being a big part of the answer in a few years. But for now, I think we still, as a sector, need to get the basics correct and need to get the technology stack assured in a form which can be installed at rapid scale very quickly across installations. And standardized water will be important there. Before I go to other questions, I'm seeing a lot of questions come up. Sunisha, there's enough new addition to your shade card. So we have turquoise that Alex was talking about, and somebody is talking about pink hydrogen. So not putting you on the spot with these new ones, but there is a question on blue hydrogen. So if you want to take that one, which goes that what's your take on the blue hydrogen from methane cracking with reference to India? Maybe if you want to talk about how it's used, and then we go from there.
Sure, probably Alex would be the best person. I learned a lot from his presentation that he shared yesterday. So blue, turquoise, hydrogen is what Alex can answer. I can probably answer the pink one.
Yeah, I can quickly jump in on Blue. I mean, so Blue is basically taking your existing natural gas cracking processes and adding carbon capture, right? And so today, at today's prices, Blue is cheaper than green, but in some sense, structurally, Blue will always be more expensive than gray hydrogen because you're just taking the existing process and adding carbon capture to it. So some people are talking about it as a bridge fuel, particularly in places like US where you have very cheap natural gas, or if you're in Qatar, or Mozambique, or Egypt or something. But I think for India, it makes sense just to go straight to green because the green versus blue differential is not much, and it's evaporating as we speak, thanks to innovators like Nutrace. I project green to be cheaper than blue within the decade. And the other thing about blue, which is kind of I guess a dirty secret, is it's not established either. Like, it's a very new technology. There's almost no carbon capture product in the world that has actually been successful in terms of meeting its expectations. So in some sense, green hydrogen is actually a much more mature technology than blue. So especially for India, it makes sense just to go straight to green and skip right over blue.
Great answer, Alice. Thank you. Did you want to comment on the pink part of the shade card, Sunisha?
Sure. So again, pink, as I said, it's a very promising but a cost undefined pathway that you have here. So a lot of challenges probably in the adoption of pink hydrogen. Number one, you do not know actually how to handle that nuclear waste. You have to retrofit all of your nuclear power plants. You have to invest a lot on infra. You have to invest a lot on the waste management, because nuclear waste isn't something that you can dump just openly. So the entire waste management piece of it has not yet been deciphered. The entire capital costs that are associated with retrofitting of these nuclear plants, the entire nuclear projects, of course, they themselves involve a lot of high capital costs. So a lot of it is still unproven. Then you have the public perception of adopting nuclear waste or nuclear energy for producing hydrogen. So anyways, not a lot of players jump right into the field. There's sort of limited flexibility, if I may say, that's associated with it. One biggest advantages that I think for pink or purple hydrogen is probably the stability that it offers, and it's like a continuous production that you can have for pink or purple hydrogen, as compared to say green hydrogen, where the supply of renewable energies it's restricted, it's timed, for example sun, wind, water, etc. But there you can have continuous production. You have obviously the lowest carbon footprint that probably can exist for any hue of hydrogen. Then you also have energy security in a way, since you're just using the nuclear waste. So a lot of whys and hows that need to be answered for pink hydrogen, but again, a distant dream, at least for India, is what I think.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Prashanta, or should I move to the next one?
Yes, I think I would like to comment on this. The thing is, I personally believe we are adding too many shades to the whole discussion, and it really stems down from how you look into nuclear energy. For me, nuclear, solar, hydro, wind, all of it is renewable electricity, so it all should come across under green hydrogen. We should just keep our life very, very simple and not complicate it so much.
So make it simpler by carbon and non-carbon. And I think this entire story of nuclear energy we'll have to get into in another session. But I'm also seeing two questions which I was expecting to come a little earlier on the VC attitudes towards green hydrogen. Or actually, there are two questions, one from Abhinav Chaudhary and one from Kunal, on OEM electrolyzers, and then can VCs do pilot projects. So I'll take the liberty of taking the first crack at them. So I'm talking about Blume, but also talking about what I'm hearing from other investors in the deep tech space. Green hydrogen definitely is exciting to many of us. There is opportunity, as we showed. We've talked to 8-9 companies. We are seeing some companies which are now venture investable. We haven't yet, specifically Blume, haven't yet supported any company in this space, but we are hopeful of doing that within this calendar year. And as we said, the blueprint was a way of identifying opportunities, not just for ourselves, but for other investors, because in the VC sector, you need a lot of people to come together for any technology or company to grow. So we are hoping that more people will come along. we are keeping close track on the companies. Prashanta's New Trace was one of the first companies we talked to around this time last year. And then some very interesting opportunities coming out of the IISc IIT Madras corridor. So yes, we do hope to make investments. Not yet. We haven't made any yet, but this is a space which is up and coming, and we expect there will be a lot more activity. And no response from a VC is ever no. It only means not yet or not right now. And I'm very sure that many of those things do change in the next year or two. On the issue about plants, the first of a kind plants, that is actually a issue which this is not specific to green hydrogen. This is not limited to this sector. A lot of sectors such as solar, even in some ways robotics. We saw a pitch yesterday from a company doing nuclear fission, right? Lots of companies have started off with venture money. And I started my career as a debt banker, and we believe that if the technology risks are assumed by somebody else, the bankers can come in and do the equipment and the plant. But in a lot of sectors, that's not always the case. You will need the venture capital world, which understands experimental capital, which understands the pricing of risk, to take on the job of doing the first few plants. Is that what equity should be used for? Not always, and maybe not the best answer. But between the 2 or 3 kinds of capital that you have available, equity, debt, grant, and guarantees, you will always find that the venture capital world is best equipped and most adept at identifying risk and pricing it, which is why some of the first of a kind plants are invested in by VCs. The portfolio that Blume holds in electric vehicles is another example. Automotive plants used to be a darling of the banking sector, but that's where also we've invested. So you will see a lot of these investments coming in. Will the bar be higher for these companies? Probably yes, in terms of technology maturity, but probably not in terms of the stage of manufacturing. And that's, I think, a good thing, because there is increasingly large amounts of concessional or targeted capital in this space, the entire energy transition, green transition space. So there are pools of capital both in India and abroad which are willing to take some of these risks for the sake of climate. But will that require more maturity before the venture capital comes in than compared to software or e-commerce? Probably yes. So we will evolve, I think, in India, an answer which is specific to us. And that answer, I'm very hopeful, will be something which will help accelerate the process, because the venture capital world is fairly mature and knows how to price risk. So slightly longish answer to those 2 questions, but I hope I've, as a good panelist, spurred more questions and given answers. Let me see if my co-panelists want to add something to that.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, to me, the product finance, this is one space where this is a big issue for a lot of client finance. And I should say there are some venture debt folks, whether it's, the Secrets Finance, the AU Small Finance Bank, the folks like Areta. But this is one area I'm slightly less worried, because I do see the big players, the IOCLs, the NTPCs, the Adanis being the off-takers, and the opportunity for the startups is more in being the OEMs, being the technological innovators. I see one question about storage. We're actually finding internationally, and just for context, Third Derivative has supported about 9 startups in the climate tech space, in the hydrogen space so far, although not in India yet. And a lot of them are not actually in the electrolyzers; they're in the storage, they're in the transport. Liquid hydrogen carriers, liquid organic hydrogen carriers, ammonia conversion, better waste. Amobia, for example, is one that just raised money. So there's lots of ways to innovate. Absolutely, we need folks in the production side, but we also need people in the storage and the transport, in better ways to use it. And so I think there's a lot of space for startups to find a niche, and then even if the product developer might be a large player like a Renew or an L&T or whoever it is.
Probably I'd just refer to Darwin's theory that I often refer for such tech defining moments that rarely happen. So say this is your status quo, the status quo solutions, and we are not looking for, say, marginally better technologies. Green hydrogen probably would be a leap here. So when such sort of leaps, not marginal but completely disruptive, happen anywhere, the first set of companies that come in the market, they are generally the ones that educate the entire market about that space. So these are the companies that define the market, who with which it set the foundation of the entire market, upon which, say, marginally better models are built. For example, when EVs came in, most of the focus was there on batteries of manufacturing EVs, OEMs, etc. And then probably second order or third order models such as EV financing came in. So we understand as venture capitalists, this is a segment that sort of requires some capital commitments. It requires some physical infra. So we at least do not shy away from such commitments, because we know and we understand that this is the nature of this technology. So unless and until it's driving economies of scale and dragging the costs down, that is how most of the technologies develop. We understand the nature of the business, and we are ready to take that risk. And anyway, this early stage capital risk is very short lived, is what we think. Most of the projects that we are seeing there, they are getting more bankability, they are getting more acceptance, wider integration, wider economies of scale, and this is just in a sense how technologies develop. So all of it is positive for us.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just come in again. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's a very chicken and egg situation, right? When you want to do a huge technological leap, it takes capital, right? And without demonstration, who will put capital? And I think to all the founders, I would just urge you to remind the VCs about the CAC cost of consumer businesses, and I think they'll start to see your point. So what we usually do is obviously the early pilots have to be funded with the venture capital. There's no other way of taking the risk, but you have to be very smart in terms of the size of the pilot, what kind of pilot you're trying to do, what is the real scale of demonstration that will give enough proof points. Can you fund them with paid pilots? There are multiple different ways. There are grants which are more and more available right now, which are probably not available when we were starting off. So if you're a smart founder, you figure out how to get that early part of the capital in the early days and then take it forward from there.
Right. And Prashanta, I think this is a very good segue to a question that came in a little earlier from Nasreen, who is representing the Department of Environment and Climate Change, Government of Maharashtra. And actually a very interesting question. She's saying, what are the expectations of startups in the domain of clean energy, green hydrogen? So why don't you take your first shot, and then maybe we can also come in, Alex, Alicia, and I.
Sure. I think as startups grow, this especially in technology, manufacturing intersection, they start exploring different avenues of getting the resources for scaling up. This is very similar to what we are also trying to do. And then you look for different incentives, different resources that the state governments or the central government will give out. So the government of India has started with its own PLI scheme and other support mechanism for electrolyzer manufacturing and the green hydrogen sector per se. But a lot of different state governments are also coming up. But I think those are very useful in the period of post 2 years of the startup's journey. I think what is more required is how do we support innovation in the first 1 to 2 years of the journey, while putting up benchmarks for accelerated demonstration of different technologies and scaling it up. So the early days is when I think the most support is required. And I think if we really want to nurture an ecosystem in a particular region, we have to make access to early support system, be it in manufacturing, be it in technology expertise, be it in capital requirement for the first few demonstrations.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that by saying that there are often pots of money and grants for startups in this space, especially the energy transition space. But you just need to be aware that which stage is the company at. So there are grants like the Mission Innovation from the Department of Biotech. A lot of the BIRAC grants also go to energy companies. There are a fair number of grants from MNRE. Even the SITE program, the Green Hydrogen Mission, has a focus on supporting innovation in this sector. So there are pots of money which are often not aligned exactly with the stages of a startup. But I've seen many startups use these grants very smartly. And I personally, being in the VC space, I use the fact that a company has gotten some of these grants as a very good signal of two things. One, validation of the tech, because the committees usually have a lot of experts. So that to me, that's a good validation of the tech. And two, especially for the energy sector, the ability to navigate government rules, even to get those grants. And there is usually way too much friction than there should be. But that is going to be the case with a lot of sectors, especially in the energy transition. And the ability to get a grant from the government and use it properly is a very good signal that this person can deal with the regulatory world later on. So to me, that's a strong signal whenever I see companies pitching to me in this sector. And there are a large number of grants which people should look at. So that's part of the answer. But I think what I heard from Prashanto is that what startups expect from government is also a lot of understanding on what the evolution is. How can you help regulate these areas? Very often, if there are no standards or codes on a sector, then the company cannot sell to a government-owned entity or a PSU. So rapid acceleration of those standards and codes will also be helpful for adoption of these technologies from startups. And I can add that one. Let me see, Alex, if you want to comment on this.
Yeah, I'll say two things. So one is the size of the grants. I think a lot of, you look at Startup India, you look at MNRE, it's often 25 lakh grant, 50 lakh grant, which for a fintech or an edtech startup might be sufficient. For a lot of climate tech, it needs to be larger. I had someone come to me saying, I've got a metal oxide electrolyzer technology, and it was, TRL 3-4, and he needed, I think it was 4 or 5 core for a lab to do the work. And it's just too early for an accelerator. It's too early for a VC. It needs to be government funded. And that mindset of, we're going to give these small 50, 25, 50 lakh grants for climate tech, it needs to be bigger. The second way is these first of a kind. So I should note, third derivative, we are trying to develop a program for first of a kind, because we recognize that's an issue. But, for example, in Kerala, they've got a hydrogen fuel cell boat now that was government funded. And ironically, it's actually using gray hydrogen because they haven't got the electrolyzer going yet. But the point is, obviously the entire ecosystem is not in place yet. But to prove this marine application of hydrogen, they need to get things going. The government was willing to spend that to help the startup prove their technology. And now it will now help the electrolyzer guys, and will help the storage guys, and will help all these other companies that are part of the ecosystem, and will also help highlight what are the gaps in that ecosystem. Oh, we're importing all of this type of container from abroad. Hey, that's an opportunity for startups. So I think it's really important both to relook at the size of the grants available, and also just figure out how you can use government agencies, PSUs, to actually implement first of a kind projects, to give some validation and to give some learning, even if they're not fully economic today.
Yep. Thank you. Swinshir, did you want to comment on this one? If not, I have another question lined up for you. Okay. Do you want to talk about the entire storage story? Because there've been a couple of questions on this, and I think we've spent enough time on the production side and the consumption side. Maybe if you want to talk about the storage side, and then I'll add on to that.
Sure. So as I told in probably my presentation, again, not an expert, but hydrogen in its essence can be stored in just 3 formats. It's either a gaseous format, a liquid format, or in a chemical format, say in the form of ammonia. So since hydrogen is a very light molecule, the storage presents some other set of problems. One of the biggest one probably being hydrogen embrittlement that happens when you retrofit the existing pipelines for the storage and transportation of hydrogen. So that's one of the biggest problems that we think needs to be tackled with. It's a bit counterintuitive to say in a way that ammonia, for example, is one of the biggest sources of storing hydrogen in the current format and current times. And that is a better storage option of storing hydrogen than hydrogen itself. So instead of storing hydrogen in its proper gaseous format, it's rather stored as ammonia, because there, of course, it goes through the entire chemical transformation, and it's stable, more stable, embrittlement, etc. That all of that doesn't happen. So there are a lot of energy efficiency losses related to each of the methods of storage. You have gaseous method, you have a lot of capital commitments, you have a lot of infra capex involved in storing hydrogen in a gaseous format. Again, for the chemical process and the liquid process, you have energy efficiency losses. So probably for ammonia, if I'm not wrong, it's just 50% efficiency that you get from storing hydrogen in a chemical format, and it's around 33% if you store hydrogen in a liquid format. So storage is one thing that again we are looking forward to as a problem and a solution, where technology needs to disrupt, and it will be very exciting to see how the entire storage equation pops up. So that is why we say most of the hydrogen that will be produced will also be consumed at the same location, because storage is a missing piece of the puzzle, but distribution, again, it's another set of challenges. So entire storage and distribution, they are a segment, they are a different beast altogether.
Who wants to go next? Alex, Prashant, I can see both of you have responses lined up. Prashant, do you want to go first?
Sure. Very interesting question. I think there are multiple things to this whole question, right? And this is again a very eclectic view. So I agree with Monisha. When things are starting up, most of the opportunity is in the point of use application. Because why do you want to transport it if you have it? Volume of utilization of hydrogen, why not use it in the pure form? The storage technology will again take some time of, I think, research and development, but I don't think it's too far. There are many different companies in France, in other parts of the world, who are building technologies, who are building laminates, who are building coating on top of the metal hydride to actually slow down the whole embrittlement problem. And I think material science breakthrough will not be that far. But another interesting point of view I always bring is that you don't have to look into energy efficiency at all point in time. Sometimes that answers are geopolitical or demand based. For example, some countries, so in Nordic countries, one of my friends' company, they do sand batteries. So basically take renewable electricity and pump in as heat in sand, right? You're using sand and they're not looking at efficiency. But because they have long cycles of availability of renewable, non-availability of renewable, very recently raised close to $8 million in the seed round. There's another company in Norway, Photon Cycle, which recently just raised him $5 million of seed round to convert ammonia and store it, and they're doing the first pilot in Denmark, right? The reason they're not looking for efficiency, they're looking for when can we produce the ammonia and when can we utilize it, right? So for a lot of geographies like Japan, they don't have large renewable availability. For them, ammonia, even with the poor efficiency, would make a lot of sense because they will get it from region where you have surplus of renewable electricity. The same with Europe. So different forms of storage, different forms of transportation will come into effect based on different geographic requirements. Is what I believe. And I think there is a lot of good work that's going on in the material science, and the storage solution would also come in terms of different forms and shape factor.
Thanks, Prashant. Alex?
Yeah, so actually, the very first project I did with IFC, we were looking at, do you put the hydrogen production here, transport the electricity using wires, and then put the electrolyzer next to the fertilizer plant? Or do you put the electrolyzer next to the RE and put a pipeline? And our conclusion was generally a pipeline is cheaper than a wire. Or do you just actually co-locate, put the fertilizer plant right next to your RE production? So it'll vary on a case-by-case basis, but potentially, if the cost of production becomes low enough and the cost of transportation is high enough, it could make sense actually to locate your fertilizer plant next to your source of production rather than transporting it. But yeah, that said, I'm not our transport and storage expert. That's Ravi, but Ravi is very bullish on ammonia and LOHCs, and just because there's a lot of innovations going on in terms of the cost is slightly more expensive now, but in terms of the energy density, it's quite good. So it'll be cheaper to transport in the long run. And so there's a lot of opportunity for startups to innovate, on different enzymes and different membranes and different things to basically different catalysts to make the reaction process cheaper, to lower the energy efficiency losses that Sunisha mentioned. So this is kind of an area of active research. A lot of companies are working on this, and hopefully, the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see more and better solutions for transport and storage.
Thanks. And just to complicate your previous example first, if you put the hydrogen next to the fertilizer plant next to the production, then you have to think about railway lines to transport all the fertilizer, right? So it's either pipelines, wires, you have to transport something. There will be some footprint. Just and having good carbon markets or having good markets for energy, just make sure that you're getting to efficient answers and not regulated answers, which are often very inefficient in the longer term. So it's about making sure that all factor markets are working well. Let me go to a bunch of questions which are around the maturity of the market. Both where are the first opportunities for green hydrogen? The demand side things. This is coming from Shashank. There's a question on from Rohit on who's going to buy green hydrogen. I think there's a curiosity about how is the market looking right now and how do we perceive this to go forward. Let me see, Alex, do you want to take that on? You've seen some evolution longer than some of us are here.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to continue to depend on the economics. There is still a green premium. And so this is why, I'm particularly bullish on technology plays that can continue to drive down that green premium, or companies that can, take their, let's say, improved electrolyzers and export those to markets where there is a carbon price, or potentially, selling to, for example, steel producers where the steel is subject to a carbon price, CBAM through Europe. So they're looking at how do I use hydrogen. And so you're not actually selling the hydrogen, you're exporting the hydrogen directly, you're exporting the hydrogen as an input to the steel, which is then being exported. So I think it'll be a mix of the economics continue to come down and to make the use cases more and more viable. I think certainly I love Sunisha, the chart she had where she's, these are economic today, and then, as you go down, it gets less and less viable, right? So things like ammonia, the green premium is quite low. And then is there an energy security argument, to be made in terms of reducing natural gas imports? So I think it'll be a mix of the economics will continue to improve, the regulations will continue to evolve. We'll start to see more and more carbon prices or carbon price equivalents in the forms of regulation, mandates, environmental quotas, whatever it is, both within India and abroad, and that'll create more and more opportunities. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not cheap. It's certainly a long battle, and it's going to take years and decades to see this market fully bloom and mature.
Thanks, Prashant. Let me come to you.
That was a
Go ahead, Sunisha.
Yeah, just adding to Alex's point, he raised a very interesting point of green premium. So most of the products that we see, the end products that we see, at least in the entire climate segment here in India, they command some sort of green premium. And as long as this green premium is not supported or at least justified by the regulators, generally consumers, say be the B2C business or the B2B industrial clients, industrial buyers, they do not care about how green your product is. So the lowest green premium is probably where the sectors would be most evolved for the adoption of green hydrogen. So methanol, for example, methanol is generally created by natural gas, if I'm not wrong. And most of the natural gas is what we import because of the very low prices abroad. So most of the methanol in a way subsequently is also imported, almost 80% of it. So if they're probably inculcating green hydrogen and the entire say addition of green hydrogen to its value chain might command some green premium. So it's the end cost of the product, the kind of green premium that it commands. All of this is going to determine the adoption of any sector in terms of green hydrogen. Yes, Mudit, you were saying something.
I was going to bring in Prashanta, but I want to add on to what you said on the green premium side. I think India pays a green premium when there are two conditions or one of the two conditions met. One, either the operational cost, like in air conditioners or electric vehicles, is a fairly large chunk of the total cost of ownership of an asset. So both for air conditioners and electric vehicles, you've seen the transition. I say that India has seen 4 energy transitions with LEDs, solar, electric vehicles, and now EVs for cargo. But 2 of those were actually driven by the high cost of operational. And the second condition is when the government supports it from the angle of energy security. We import 80 to 85% of our energy in all forms, and especially oil and gas, and coal are almost 30%, right? So when the energy security aspect becomes more important, then the government or the public sector agrees to pay a green premium. When the operational costs are higher, the consumer pays a green premium. And when it is only about a fixed asset, then there is no green premium in the market. That's just my take. People may agree or disagree. But let me come back to Prashanta. I think I can split up the question in two parts. Where are you seeing your the green hydrogen that you're helping produce sell right now, and where do you see the market evolve in a few years?
Sure, Mudit, very interesting question. I think that was with the whole problem statement that we started with, right? So hydrogen itself has seen a lot of cycles, and I like to vouch for it. Like that's why the word hype has come into the whole panel discussion. Hydrogen has seen a lot of cycles, but the difference here is this: that the previous cycles were only driven by climate change or concern for climate change and primary focus towards mobility. We are just comparing EVs with hydrogen, and that was the end of a whole conversation. Now things have changed. First is there is more awareness about industrial decarbonization and the role of hydrogen in industrial decarbonization and this connected to climate change. The second is, I think, geopolitics, the energy security part, the availability of natural gas, the Ukraine crisis did send a lot more inquiries towards our way when things started to go south. And the final point is, again, for me, the aspirational part. A lot of public sector companies, private companies in India and Middle East are looking at a business energy transition in terms of what they're doing. Either they have committed to their shareholders, or they understand that in order to stay relevant for the next 1 decade, 2 decade, or three decades, they have to transform the way they do businesses. They have to do things differently, and that cannot happen overnight. You can't pump in billions of dollars and overnight have an entire business transformation. It's going to take time, and they will start now. I think those three things are working in tandem to drive through adoption or demand in different sectors. Obviously, some sectors are moving at a much faster pace, also thanks to the mandates that the government keeps talking about, the likes of refineries, shipping, the likes of steel, whereas sectors like fertilizers, which are also very heavily, at least import dependent in India, you don't see a lot of movement because of all the government subsidies and everything else which is involved in the fertilizer business, right? In mobility, I think for the first time we're seeing two pathways. Earlier it was all about fuel cell and the net energy conversion and how it did not make sense. But all of a sudden people have started to realize that you can actually have internal combustion engine burning hydrogen as a fuel, right? So all of a sudden, all the thermal power plants who have large assets are thinking about burning hydrogen in the turbines. The car makers are also thinking about it. So for the first time, we have a plethora of opportunities that is opening up in the sector. And people are trying different things. A lot of things will, I think, will be opened up with a current set of PLI scheme. The major challenge in the market, at least from the demand side, has been that there was no available supply per se, which is there for anyone to do any meaningful transition and transformation. But I think things will start changing from this year.
Thank you, Prashanta. I was also getting a couple of questions on the transportation sector, but I think we've covered some of that. Nishant, your question was partly answered earlier, but also I think if you go back to the hydrogen blueprint, we've talked a little bit on the consumption and production costs of various kinds of hydrogen. Hopefully, you will find some of the answers there. I think we just talked about the green premium part, and so let me maybe just take two last questions. One is on the slightly specific rural applications, biomass to hydrogen. I think Prashanta referred to that in some way, not entirely sure what was the context there, but if you want to talk about the biomass to hydrogen, I think, Sunisha, if you want to come into that as well. And Alex, you're also welcome. And then the last one we'll take is on the pricing and how we see the evolution in the next few years. So biomass in rural areas and then pricing. Maybe those are the last two questions we can take. Prashant, do you want to take the one on biomass or?
Yeah. So I think for a decentralized system, biomass makes a lot of sense in terms of rural areas where there is a lot of supply for organic material which is available. I think there are certain improvement in scale, technology, plant performance, plant establishment that needs to be done, and I think there will be different processes that the industry or the government and the policymakers will figure out to spur that. We also have heard few interesting theories about decentralized production of hydrogen from electrolyzers from rooftop solar. So for rural application, but again, although we are not very, although we have tried to talk about the energy conversion and efficiencies, the energy security factor has been pointed out to us. But again, those are all interesting conversations that are happening at this point in time.
Alex, Anisha, do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, I think here's another area where there's ripe for innovation, and it's also important to think about the most viable use cases. So for example, there's this company, Grassroots Energy, I was speaking with recently, that's doing this decentralized. And here, this actually links back to the transportation question, right? If I've got one big centralized fertilizer plant, one big centralized petrochemical plant, it's going to make sense for me to have a giant electrolyzer, from folks like Nutrace. But if I've got a use case for hydrogen, let's say as a cooking fuel or as some sort of small scale application, maybe it makes sense to use a small scale biogas digester. Now the question then becomes, well, if I've got this digester, why don't I just use bio-CNG, or why don't I just use biomass directly? And so there have to be a pretty compelling use case to need hydrogen. Maybe it's some sort of drying application where you need the molecule and you need the particular heat or other characteristics of hydrogen. So I certainly think there are niches where this can make sense, but there's going to need some technical innovation, and we're going to have to be careful. We're finding niches where it makes sense, as opposed to where, say, bio-CNG or where direct electrification might make more sense.
Thank you.
I kind of agree on this. We still need to identify the niches for biomass. For, say, wide scale production or probably industrial level production of biomass, India is like blessed with so much biomass. We have more than 780 million tons of biomass produced every year. But one of the problems, as stated by Alex, one more problem that biomass has is it varies significantly in terms of its composition. So you do not find very consistent biomass all across. The moisture content varies, the energy content varies. So that is where, on an average, you have lower energy efficiency in terms of biomass production. So you need to tackle this lower energy efficiency. You need to standardize the biomass, the quality of biomass. Then storage, distribution, again, one of the biggest problems that come up for biomass, such a decentralized model. So again, all of this needs to be solved for biomass.
Yeah. And of course, this issue around collection of biomass at reliable intervals, because you have to align with the crop cycles, always becomes an issue, whether it is, India's had, I think, 3 biogas missions in the last 30 years, and all of them broke on this issue of collection of biomass. So at least that issue still needs to be resolved, whatever use you are putting the biomass to. 2 other questions, which I think I want maybe ask the commenters to go back to the Blume blueprint. The question on gasification technology and the cost of electrolysis. You will find a lot of material in our blueprint. You're welcome to reach out to us on our email addresses again. On the cost of electrolysis, we believe that the innovation curve is just starting off. We are, of course, seeing some very interesting companies like Prashanta's and a few others that we've identified in the deck, but this is still the beginning of the cycle of innovation. And I firmly believe that more installations, larger number of plants selling green hydrogen will yield more innovation. So we are just at the beginning stage. If it's an S-curve, we're at the very beginning stage of that curve, the very early stages of innovation. There's a lot more to go. And that's where hopefully the efforts of some of us will be useful in pushing the entire frontier ahead. Because there is a lot of opportunity, there is a lot of potential in the sector, which still needs a lot more innovation. But with that, let me give the last chance to each of my panelists to go back to our question: hype, hope, or opportunity. I will mandatorily ask you to choose one of these words and then back up why you think it's either overhyped, we still have hope, or it's just an opportunity that people need to jump on. So you can't say all 3, you can't say none of the above. Choose one and substantiate your answer. Prashant, do you want to start with this?
Sure, I think my answer should be obvious, right? Opportunity. In terms of what we are seeing in the market right now, all our conversations, the kind of work that we are doing, I think it's a great opportunity for us to build in the entire ecosystem. It does play into 2 key factors that drive us at Nutrace. One is combating climate change, and second is fair and equitable access to energy. So I think hydrogen plays into that role, and we see it as a massive opportunity to do everything. Unfortunately, we don't have the time and the resources to do everything. So there is a lot of problem statements that we, as a community, can come together and solve.
Thank you. Sanisha, and then I'll ask Alex.
Sure, it's definitely an opportunity any day. I can't answer all of these three, but probably if we were to compare past, present, and future, the past was hype, present is hope, and future is opportunities, just loads of opportunities that we have. So working closely with you, Mudit, on green hydrogen with excellent founders like Prashanta and a lot of other founders. It's been so inspiring to see that this is the area, this is the technology that's the game-changing one. As Mudit said, we just had witnessed this 4 times probably before this, and this is the one that we are witnessing in the present moment. So of course, definitely opportunity.
Sanisha did manage to weave in all three in her answer. Alex, can you outsmart her in that one?
No, you told me not to scroll it too much, so I'll stick with just two. So opportunity asterisk, we'll say. So, transport, storage, novel electrolyzer materials, biopathways. I think there's just so many different areas where there's so many fundamental innovations, but also incremental innovations that are possible, business model innovations that are possible. I think there's just a lot of different opportunities for different types of companies, big, medium, and small. But I do think there's a lot of hype, particularly around, let's say, vehicles, hype around, India being a green hydrogen exporter. I think we have to be cautious and careful in terms of, how much stomach there's going to be for subsidies, for example. But yeah, I think we need to be careful, but let's say cautiously optimistic, cautiously opportunistic.
Thank you. I think I agree with that one. It's time to be hopeful. It's time to be opportunistic as well. Let me thank all my panelists, I think, and also a lot of the people who put up questions. I think with the questions, you are able to go through a lot of these aspects of the sector, whether it is storage, whether it is electrolyzer costs, solutioning, government interface, the rural areas, some very, very thought-provoking questions, which actually helped our conversation as well. Again, one last plug for the blueprint, in which you'll see a lot more of these answers. And you do have our email addresses. If you have a very compelling opportunity, please do reach out. Would love to have a chat. Would love to see if we can partner with you. Green hydrogen definitely is a priority for us for this year. And we would love to see a lot more innovation coming out of India for India and from India for the world. So again, thank you to my panelists and to Climate Collective Foundation for inviting us and for all the provocative questions we had. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
So much, guys. Bye-bye.